Hello, my name is Maria Foster Duengo, and I am a life coach with Phoenix Inspired Coaching. I support parents and teachers to go from surviving the experience of the kids that they teach and care for to actually thriving and transforming those relationships so they can be those open and connected and loving adults that kids love to be around. And on today's podcast, I am welcoming Monica Otero. Monica Otero is a teacher in British Columbia, Canada. She has 16 years of experience in education, and she brings with her a wealth of knowledge from her diverse teaching roles that she's had. When Monica isn't out teaching the kids and transforming the world, you'll see her swimming and participating and competing in triathlons. And I'm so excited that she's here today to share her insights and her perspectives on what's working and what's not working in public education. Welcome, Monica. How are you doing today?
Great. Thank you, Maria. Thanks for the nice introduction.
Yeah. So look, I want to get right into it. What I'd like to know from you is, we're going to start our conversation with dealing with leadership and leading with impact and how that shapes school culture. So from your perspective as a teacher with 16 years of experience, can you share with our listeners what is effective leadership in schools?
Well, first of all, when I hear the word leadership, I immediately think about administrators and how the leaders of our school, the school that I work in, the schools that I've worked in the past really do have an impact on the culture and the shape of how the day-to-day, how the school goes. So for me, what effective leadership looks like in those roles is really having administrators that are highly visible on a day-to-day basis in the school. Really having that relatedness with the students and also with the staff is really key and important in being an effective leader. Whenever I'm in staff meetings, and I worked in numerous schools in my career, I really look to see how they lead staff meetings. Are there acknowledgements? Are staff being acknowledged? Are staff being celebrated? And then, of course, most importantly, how admin deal with the disciplinary issues in the school regarding students is really key in being an effective leader. I think those are the top 3-4 things for me, especially around, well, the last one occurred now in BC is that there's a cell phone ban.
And how's that going? How is it that provincially the Ministry of Education has now dictated to all of the public schools in BC and all 45,000 teachers that there is now a cell phone ban? What does that look like in practice?
So, well, first of all, I'm glad that there's some actual wordage, there's actual hard and fast rules that says that there is a cell phone ban in BC. It's better than having nothing. In terms of how that's going, personally, I can talk about my experience. It's working and it's not working. I found with the younger kids, especially the grade 8 kids I teach in high school, it's not really a major issue. But with the senior students, it is because they have those habitual habits of the past. And in terms of admin getting involved, I think that for me personally, I haven't had to go to admin yet. But what's there for me that's really not working is that the parents are not necessarily on board. And that is an issue because the parents feel like they need to have contact with their child throughout the day, regardless if they're in a class or not, and during instructional time. And that really is a part that's missing in the work of all this. Because it doesn't work when I email home and parents are
supportive. Yeah. And what's the impact of that? So you've got a government that said we've now banned cell phones in British Columbia public schools. And then you have kids in your senior classes that are using the phone. The parents want to be in communication with them. You notify them that, hey, it doesn't work to have your kid, be in communication with you during my classes because I'm teaching and we have a cell phone ban. And then what happens?
Yeah, so it's really about following the protocol. I haven't taken it up the ladder yet. So I have one class that does use their phones for educational purposes, and I have them write their names on the board. So every single day, because so that they understand that having their phone is a privilege and not something to be taken for granted. So I do use phones. To say one more thing, in an ideal world, all classrooms would have and should have iPads and laptops and things like that. But because we don't have that, I do use cell phones as a tool. So it gets great in one of my classes. Like if there's a gray area in terms of like, okay, well, like, yeah, you're looking at these instructions or these videos of how to do this project. However, like, there's always the distractions, pop-ups, and notifications that come up. So it's really tricky in that sense. And then I have another class where it's a little bit more hard and fast. Like, we don't need your phone, so why would you be taking them out in the first place? Could you ask me your question one more time?
Yeah. So what's it like when you've got a government dictating in British Columbia schools that cell phones are banned and you don't get support from the parents? And they're the ones who gave their child a cell phone. They want to be able to communicate with them, and it doesn't work that it's happening during class time.
Yeah, well, ultimately it doesn't. And then I think that's beyond me. Parents have a say of what they choose or not choose to do with their child. I think that in those cases, it's really comes down to dealing with the administrators. I haven't reached that level yet in my classes. I mean, we're halfway through the school year, so it's bound to come up in the next couple of months as we've had, like, I've had a fresh start with this in the second term of like really going over the rules, going over the impact of using phones, why it's a distraction, why it's also unnecessary, and the impacts on their mental health. I'll let you know if it happens. I hope it doesn't happen.
What I'm observing in the schools is that the Ministry of Education made a decision to ban cell phones, and then they downloaded how that was going to look like to the districts. And then the district downloaded it to each individual school. And that doesn't work. And I think that's part of the problem. I think the Ministry of Education needed to have said, this is the ban and this is what it looks like in every one of the schools, and standardize it right across the board. Because the minute you let each individual school do its own enforcement of it, then you end up with all these different ways of being with cell phones or not being with cell phones. And then it really depends on your leadership in schools. And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't work. So I'd like to move on to the next question that I have. What I'd like to know from you is, it's something that the public doesn't usually think about, but how does leadership in schools directly impact the well-being of teachers?
Well, that is a very loaded question. It's really about how the admin lead. I think that what that's really about is about the working conditions of the teaching staff and our classroom composition and what administrative tasks we continuously have to do on an ongoing basis.
Can you explain to the public, like I know you and I know what we're speaking about when we talk about working conditions and classroom composition. Could you break that down so that people who might not be in education would understand what the working conditions are specifically and what does classroom composition mean?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm only speaking about like my experiences. So where I work and in the schools that I worked in, and I worked in 2 different districts only in the capacity of high school. So currently classes in my school are supposed to be capped at 30 and they're not necessarily capped at 30. And
capped at 30 means like 30 students per class?
Yes, that's right. Okay. Maximum. It's not really the number of like students in the room or the bodies in the room. It really comes down to who these students are and which students have more needs than others. I'm not saying that, a specific student needs more attention than another kid. But what I mean is that certain students who have learning disabilities need adaptations for the curriculum. When you have a classroom with like 75% adaptations or something crazy like that, it's really challenging because then I have students who are able to work really quickly, to complete projects without a problem. And then I have students who I need to adapt and sometimes even modify, which is actually a different type of category project, so that they can still be engaged in the work and not feel like they can't do it because it's too challenging.
What I'm hearing you saying is that the districts typically have a numbers-based approach to classroom composition, when in fact, if they were able to look at the classroom composition, the types of needs that you have in the class, that would make a difference versus the numbers. And this becomes the numbers versus needs conversation.
I've talked to my admin about this, and like currently and also in the past. There will always be kids that are not designated, so they don't have individual education plans. The tricky thing is that those kids that are designated, they get funding for having an extra. In our district, we call them education assistants. It's basically support staff that would come in. What it looks like on paper, and that's how schools operate. But in reality, like that's really not the case. There are way more needs than what it looks like on paper. And that's like the super frustrating part for me, is to advocate for having an extra person in my classroom to support my students. And I can't get that because of what's given and what's already there in terms of who has an IEP and who doesn't have an IEP.
And how does that situation around the number of kids in the class and or the classroom composition impact teachers' well-being?
It's huge. It's huge. Like you can just talk to a math teacher. I'm not a math teacher. Where you may not know is we have tutorials in the mornings. And so like for those kids that need help, like they're all coming into their academic classes in the morning. And those teachers, I'm thinking about my math colleague, was totally bombarded with students like coming in every day, where it's like you can't even meet the needs of students needing help during tutorial sessions in the morning.
And are working conditions, is it a bottoms-up approach in regards to working conditions or a top-down approach?
I think it depends on how. It's top-down, and there's certain things that the district has, and maybe there's a bit more to say about that. It's really coming from the district and the ministry levels in terms of what we're dealing with. There's things that we can do within our school that we do have control, but then there's other things of how that's just the way the district operates. And each district is totally different. From having worked in two different districts. It's like one district might do things one way and another district does things another way. And also like the terminology and the language, like sometimes that's a little bit different too. I've been through 3 strikes. I've personally been laid off and surplused twice, and gone through a bit of a tumultuous career with the different, with the people who are in charge of the ministry. And it's been very disheartening to be in this career for that long. I think you really have to love your job to be in this career. It really does take something to be a teacher these days. And it's not something the public necessarily knows about what I need to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I feel pretty lucky to have really good administrators at my school that are supportive. And that makes a huge difference of having that relationship and knowing that someone has my back.
I see that teachers' working conditions, I see that leaderships in schools has an impact on teachers and their well-being. And the statistics show that that's actually contributing to a global, not just local, not just national, shortage of teachers. Do you think that our working conditions and classroom composition and class size and leadership, is that all impacting people wanting to get into this profession?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that the teacher shortage it's not like people don't want to work in this job and be a teacher. The daily tasks you need to take on a day-to-day basis, the students in the classroom that you need to help, that it just becomes so unmanageable, or it just becomes more and more challenging. And this is actually the first year that I've returned to working full-time. 3 years of working part-time after sheer burnout. It really takes something. And I've also taught several different subject areas.
Can you share with us what you've taught in the past?
I'm an elective teacher, so I've taught home economics, so I've taught foods, I've taught sewing, I even taught Spanish, 3 different levels of Spanish. I've taught art, which is what I majored in school and post-secondary, and I've also taught careers 10. So just going back to your question, I really think that the teacher shortage is how it's portrayed in the media. It's like, well, no one wants to be a teacher. It's actually it's a really great job. Yeah. And what makes it challenging is is the working conditions in terms of class size and composition, and also resources. Like, I'm really lucky in my school to have resources, but when I talk to other people in other districts, like, they are super limited with the resources. And when I talk about resources, I'm like talking about like tech, or like if I want to buy something for my classroom, I can buy it. Like, that's not a problem. Or like if you need textbooks, they're there, or whatnot. So it's like, then we have to scramble to like photocopy. I know colleagues have had to photocopy novels because there's not enough for the class. As teachers were like, well adapted to the changing environments. And also, I think that's just like the nature of being a teacher. You think on your feet, and you have to pivot from moment to moment if something's not working. Like, if I don't know, if you couldn't book the computer on wheels, or you can't get something, then it's like, okay, well, you got to fly by the seat of your pants. Like, that's the nature of the job.
I'd like to move on to educating kids and that next generation of change makers in the world. Are we set up as a public school system to create change makers who are out there to change the world, given the lack of resources, given the burnout that we experience, given the shortage of teachers, classroom composition, classroom sizes? Like, what's it going to take for us to educate the next generation?
Whoa. Okay. So that's that's a really good question. And I know that this has probably come up, maybe, I don't know, this conversation, but we're still teaching how we did like 100 years ago or more by now.
And what do you mean by that?
For me, how I see it's a very individual approach to learning, in that, like, we're giving a test and then you have to memorize this, and then you need to, you sit in desks and you sit in rows, learn something, and then you study for the test, and it works. It's not like that is not valid or important, but we're, in terms of the next generation and especially what we're given now with AI, and what I see is that we need to create an education system where we work more as a collective, where students are working more, where we teach them how to work more collaboratively, especially with the way that the world is going in terms of climate change and political unrest, and just the current events that are happening in the world.
Yep, we've got the war going on in Gaza. We've got another war going on in Russia for several years, and that's a world that doesn't work.
Yeah, and for me, what I see is that those world events aren't really being acknowledged as a district necessarily, and as a school. Sometimes I feel like where the ministry stands is that they rather be politically correct rather than taking a stand about about morality. Speaking about the war in Gaza, we, as educators, we can't really sit with, there are certain things that I haven't been told not to say that. There's like this line where it's like, okay, we can talk about this, but we can't really say this. Those are conversations that are super important that need to be happening in schools on an ongoing basis. Like 5 years ago, it was so different. I know we were in a pandemic, but where we're going now, it's like the world is getting progressively worse politically and also environmentally. And we need to have an education system that is moving in the direction of what the world needs right now. So we need students, we need young people who can think critically and creatively. And collaboratively, and can solve problems and have excellent conflict resolution skills and excellent social skills and empathy. Definitely that's missing in the high school setting.
What I'm hearing is that, look, to create a world that works, we need to start looking at the next generation, because it might not be this generation that sorts it out. And we want to develop their critical thinking skills. We want to develop their social skills, conflict resolution skills, and teach them how to work in communities and with each other. Like, what do we do when we disagree about something? How do we sort that out between us? And I know that some of that education is happening in schools. And I also know that technology is having an impact on kids being able to develop their social skills at the age level where they're at, because it's not like they're going out after school and playing with other kids necessarily. They're spending a lot of time isolated with their computers or with strangers that they're playing video games with.
Yeah, I think further down the road, we'll see the impact of what that looks like. And like, I'm definitely concerned. Some of my students that I talk to are up until the wee hours of the morning playing video games, or playing video games during lunchtime. And I think in terms of technology, what concerns me the most is that the use of ChatGPT in classrooms and how students are using AI to complete their work.
Mm-hmm.
And I've definitely had assignments that have been AI generated. And it's silly because sometimes students think we can't tell, but like when you mark something that's in class assignment and then you look at the take-home assignment, and
they're distinctly different.
They are so different.
Like they're so different, but we're not gonna pick up on that because we're just teachers.
Of course. But it's also that sometimes when you read stuff that's AI, it's so the main theme gets sort of like recycled over and over again, that you read it and you kind of go like, what are you even talking about? Like it's just basically words. But the point is that the concern of it is the accountability of students. Like, are students being reprimanded for this in other schools? Like, I want to know. I mean, again, I'm not an academic teacher and I'm an elective teacher. With the writing that we do in my class, it was more reflective. So it's like, what are your thoughts on your project? How did you do? I'm not teaching academics this year. So if I was, I think that I would definitely do my assessment a lot different. But the accountability, like have students thinking that they can get away with this is really disconcerting. And I see that there needs to be something in each school in the handbook that acknowledges AI and what the consequences will be if students use it. And I know, and on the flip side of that, I know that there are some teachers at my school that are actually using AI to support the learning in the classroom. So I see it as a double-edged sword. I mean, this is very new for us right now. I see that students are using it and there are not any consequences. I only know this because of eavesdropping in conversations about students cheating in other classes.
So this is a good time to ask anybody who's listening that if you have any experiences as a teacher or as a parent in regards to AI in the classroom, you can put your comments below. I'd love to hear what's going on with AI in the classrooms. And the next thing that I want to talk about is we're talking about leadership. And I'd like to know, are there any leaders or administrators that inspire you?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of different administrators in all the schools that I worked at. I worked as a teacher on call for 6.5 years, in addition to the years I've worked on the contract. I would say I think my last administrator really inspired me. She was a person who was how we would describe her as human. And I had the ability to be empathetic with other people, but actually take action around bullying, racism, and hate in our school. And I've seen actually a growing problem with hate happening, actually, whether it's written or verbal. And for the first time ever in my life, I actually saw a future path as an admin. Like, if that person can do it and she can lead with that way, with an open heart and also being really firm with the students, like, wow, like that's freaking amazing. And I've had so many different administrators over the year, but there's hardly any that really stand out that are able, that are like have the capacity to lead. And it's not an easy job. I've never seen being an administrator a very desirable job or a very easy job, but to watch someone lead like that was really inspiring. And yeah, she's left our school now, so we have someone else. But that was, it was amazing to have her be part of our community.
Yeah, I got that. I really got how inspired you were by how she could lead with empathy and being connected. And I have it that she was visible, involved in the school community. And you actually saw a possibility for yourself, and the way that she did her job, that you thought if somebody could do it that way, because that's how I would do it, I could see a possibility for myself in being an administrator.
Totally. And we also need more administrators who are people of color. It's really missing. We need administrators who, especially in my school, that's very culturally diverse, like we models like that.
Yeah, like I work in one of the schools that I work at, we have the majority of students self-identify as Asian. And we've never had an Asian administrator in the last 5 years that I've been at that school, and that doesn't work. It is reflective of the school staff. It used to be a Mandarin immersion school, and now it's not. And so we still have many of the Mandarin immersion teachers there. However, I do see that teachers, support staff, and administrators are not reflective of the communities that they teach, for sure. And I'm curious, that might be another podcast where we look at what are the barriers for people going into administration or going into teaching from diverse groups.
Mm-hmm.
So, Monica, I want to thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insight and having this conversation today with all of us around leadership and the impact of leaderships in schools. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends and subscribe for more. And I want to thank everyone for tuning into my very first podcast. Stay inspired, and I will see you soon.